A few years ago, I was working as a healthcare assistant at a hospital, and recently having moved out of my dad's home, I started renting a small detached home in the countryside. I had one neighbor on this street, a man in his late 30s, who I'll call Jake. He was single and lived alone. My first encounter with Jake was when I was moving in. My dad couldn't accompany me on my first day of moving in due to his work schedule, so I was unpacking by myself. Jake walked up to me, introduced himself, and offered to help with moving my heavy items. I'm a very small woman, so I appreciated the help. The first impressions were that he was very kind, open, and polite. He chatted to me about his job, told me that he liked to play instruments and write in his spare time. We bonded over both loving the band Tool, and we both enjoyed playing the bass. The next day, I brought him some beer as a thank you. He wasn't in, however, so I left it by his front door and included a thank you note for all the previous help the day prior. Over the next few weeks as I settled in, Jake would pop by. We'd chat about music, discuss shared hobbies, drink beer, and occasionally even watch a movie together. I was new to the area, so didn't have many friends yet, so he helped provide some social interaction outside of my job. But as you can already tell, things didn't stay so good. I got home one evening to see a basket full of flowers on my doorstep and an included card which read that this was from Jake and he wanted to speak with me when I had the time. I walked in with the basket. I didn't even get a chance to put it down before I heard knocking at my door. It was around 11 p.m. and I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the window next to the door to see Jake waving at me. I opened the door, and that's the first time I can recall where I started to feel uneasy around him. He asked if I saw the basket and if I liked it. Then he asked to come in, but I said something along the lines of how tired I am from work and that we should speak tomorrow. He didn't say anything for a few seconds before he asked if I would want to grab a coffee with him before work tomorrow. I said sure and closed the door. The next morning, we grabbed a coffee at a Costa that was close to the hospital I worked at. He seemed very excited and giddy. Soon after, he asked me to be his girlfriend. I had to decline, as we had only known each other for a few weeks, and, well, he was significantly older than me. He suddenly dropped his cheery demeanor, as if he had become someone else in a matter of seconds. He grabbed his things and left, saying only that he has to go to work. I went to work too, and tried not to think too much on it. I had to work overtime that night, and started heading home at around midnight. When I pulled up to my home, I saw Jake sitting on my doorstep. I really didn't want to get out of my car, but I did and walked up to him. He started off politely, asking if I had thought over his proposal. I said no, that I'm sorry, but I'm not interested. Once again, as if a switch had flipped, he went off on me, calling me spoiled and ungrateful. I was scared at that point and asked him to leave, but he wouldn't. I managed to get to my car with him following me and showed him through the window that I'm calling the police. He swore at me and left. I didn't call the police that night. I gave him the benefit of the doubt, thinking he was just frustrated. One of my biggest regrets is not calling them. The next morning, I found wild flowers that looked like they were picked from a garden at my front door, as well as a post-it with the word sorry and a sad face drawn on it. At work that day, I was called by the nurse in charge who took me aside, saying my boyfriend was here to see me and it's urgent. She also told me to tell my boyfriend that he should not come to see me at work again, especially since I wasn't on break, as it's unprofessional. It was Jake. He wanted to ask if I had gotten his flowers and message. I went off on him, saying things along the lines of, how dare you come to my work? Get me in trouble, no less. Pose as my boyfriend. All this took place in the canteen. He didn't say anything, didn't apologize. I just told him to knock it off, and I left. Things only got worse from there. He would often wait for me when I got home, try to bribe me with gifts, more flowers. He even went as far as to get me a new guitar. I accepted nothing, and always left everything where he put them. I eventually broke down to my dad, who asked if I wanted him to speak to Jake. I said no. He offered for me to move back with him, but I had too much pride and declined. My dad was really worried about me. One day, everything came to a halt when I came home to my front door ajar, though not broken. My front room looked absolutely ransacked. I ran to my car and called the police. Nothing was missing. Absolutely nothing, but my front room, kitchen, and bedroom were all rummaged through. I told the police I had an inkling it was Jake, who they ended up questioning, but his friend vouched for him and said they were together that evening, so it couldn't have been Jake. I still don't believe that. I tried to tell the police everything that had been happening with Jake, and how I was starting to feel very unsafe. However, I had no proof but the notes he had left me, which weren't threatening. So since there was no threat to life or well-being, they literally could not do anything. My dad helped me clean everything up, and I had my locks changed. Jake actually left me alone for a little while after that. I started looking for new places to live around that time. Then, one evening, I'd come home, ate some food, showered, and went to bed, only to be awoken, I'm not sure when, to somebody standing in my doorway. I didn't move. I remember originally thinking I was having a sleep paralysis episode, but after moving my fingers, I realized I was fully awake, with a dark figure clearly standing in my doorway. My phone was under my pillow, so I rolled over to my side, pretending to still be asleep, and I just waited, with my hand under my pillow on my phone. There was no way I could call the police without alerting the person in my doorway. Eventually, I could hear the footsteps fade, and I called the police, only telling them my address and that someone just broke into my home, and I think they're still here. I got out of bed, grabbed the keys on my nightstand, and got out of the house by going out of the window and bolting it to my car. I had on a tank top and shorts. I didn't even have shoes on, which made driving horrible. I saw him then when I was pulling out, standing in the kitchen through the window. It was Jake. I had a small essential oil diffuser next to the window that shined enough light to be able to tell who the figure was. I drove as I spoke to the police. I remember just completely detaching from reality. At least that's what it felt like. I drove to my dad's house. After looking over my house, the police drove to my dad's home where I was. I told them everything about Jake, how he's been following me, coming to my work, waiting for me when I got home, and now I was 100% sure he broke into my home and was planning to do God knows what. I was told they found my front door locked when they got there and went to knock on Jake's door. He answered and looked as if he had just woken up. They asked him some questions and left him alone. It is so unimaginably hard to prove that you're being stalked in the UK. I managed to get a restraining order on the grounds of harassment, with proof that he had come to my workplace posing as my boyfriend, and a co-worker who could support me in this, as she had overheard our conversation where I had asked him to stop following me. I had also saved some texts he had sent me, where I asked how he got my number and told him to stop contacting me. But he went on to send some vaguely threatening messages along the lines of, "I'll be waiting when you come home today," which, along with the workplace incident, as well as the fact that I had mentioned Jake to the police when my house was broken into, managed to get me my restraining order. Honestly, I'm surprised the laws have not been changed. How many more women must be seriously injured or lose their lives until the police acknowledge how serious of an offense stalking should be treated as? Or at least take the victims more seriously, and not just give the perpetrator a slap on the wrist and call it a day. Not only has Jake left me with a form of PTSD, but my faith in the police has dwindled, because I now know that if I'm not actively being hurt, they most likely will push my report to the back of the pile. I went back to the house once with my dad and his friend to gather out all of my things. I didn't see Jake that time, or ever again for that matter. I had to transfer workplaces back to my original workplace as I moved back in with my dad. I'm now moved away and living alone again, trying to put the past behind me. But this type of thing definitely messed a little with me. I had to get some therapy and found it difficult to develop friendships, especially romantic relationships. He somewhat ruins that for me. I've not made any new friends since, never had a boyfriend either. I find it very hard to trust people outside of work colleagues and family. I was trying to make a friend. In the beginning, he seemed nice. We had so much in common. I hate speaking positively of him. But yeah, like I said, I just moved to the town and wanted to make some friends. I've not done it again though. I don't invite anyone to my home now. I go as far as to ask for proof of ID when the gas man comes to check my boiler.
When my cyber stalker found me. 6 years ago, I was a new mom, learning to balance my job, family, and health. My social life primarily existed on the internet at this time, and Facebook and Instagram were the main ways I kept in contact with others. I received a friend request from Steven, an old friend from high school. I accepted, and everything was normal for a while. After a couple of months, Steven sent a DM asking how I was. The conversation was fine, but it didn't take too long for me to realize that this wasn't the Steven I knew. They had the same first and common last name. His profile picture was not a picture of himself, so I never realized this was a different person. Either way, we had several mutual friends and he didn't do anything especially creepy, so I left him on my friends list. He would occasionally message and chat, and he just seemed like someone who was a bit socially awkward but harmless. I would respond, but kept the conversations brief. One day I received a text from him, which surprised me because I never gave him my number. I asked how he got my number and he said from my website, which is fair. I am an artist and had email and phone contact info on my art site. He began texting several times a day, and I would give short responses followed with something like, "At work, talk to you later," or "Dinner with the fam, have a good evening." He started talking about his new boyfriend, saying that he was one of the few gay conservatives and things were going well. I told him I'm glad he has a partner that aligns with him and wished him well. He then began talking a lot about conservative politics and was aggressive about it. And I told him I was liberal, so it's probably best we didn't have those conversations. His messages began turning sexual, where he would ask if I wanted to hear about the sex parties him and his boyfriend threw. I told him no. I didn't really know him and it was inappropriate. One day I was busy with work and returned to my phone to see dozens of messages from him, angry that I wasn't responding, and he went on and on sharing very graphic sexual stories. I responded and told him I'd been polite to him because he seemed like he didn't have many friends. But this was too much and I was blocking him. I told him I didn't believe he was gay and he was just saying it in an attempt to make me think he's harmless. I proceeded to block him on social media and I blocked his phone number. A couple of days later, I started getting lots of friend requests from accounts I didn't have mutuals with, and no friends. I knew they were probably fake pages that he was creating. I would block them and move on. Then I began getting phone calls and texts from fake phone numbers. Same thing, I would block them and move on. I messaged our mutuals to ask what they knew about him, and none of them knew him. He just requested them and they accepted. He began sending requests to my friends, family, and other women in my dance troupe. I let everyone know they needed to block him. For months, not a day passed that I did not get a weird call or friend request or DM. It would range from a normal "how are you" to vague threats of "I could make you talk to me if I really wanted to." He lived several hours away, so I wasn't particularly concerned. Things got quieter until one evening my notifications started going off like crazy and my phone was ringing with unknown numbers. It was on my art page. Probably 15 different accounts had posted porn on my page, or things like "Op is a whore" or "Op is a thief." I knew it was him because he also accidentally posted from his real account. I didn't realize I never blocked him from that page. He also sent a message to my art page saying sorry for that, and he missed his friend, and he was just trying to get my attention. I didn't respond, blocked him, and called the police. Since stalking and harassment laws are awful, they didn't do anything. Later that night I woke up around 2 a.m. for no reason other than I was just having trouble sleeping. I was up for a while playing on my phone when I started hearing a strange sound coming from the living room. It was back and forth between quiet cracking and scratching. At the time, we lived in a large ranch house and the living room was at the other end of a long hall. I got up, thinking that my cats were into something, or maybe after a mouse. I flipped on the living room light and the sound stopped. I scanned around looking for my cats when I noticed an open window. Our windows were large, from floor to ceiling, and opened by pulling them down from the top. The top of the window still had pry marks and the lock was broken. Thankfully, this house was old and the windows did not open easily. And he had only been able to open it about 8 inches. I woke my husband up, got my son out of his room and called the police. I knew it was Stephen. It was too big of a coincidence that he blew up that day and then someone tries to break into my house in the middle of the night. We couldn't prove it was him. There was no evidence other than what had happened that day that pointed to him. The police spoke to him, and I believe that scared him enough to leave me alone. I was obviously horrified at the time and began looking up anything I could find about him. I wound up finding his YouTube channel, which solidified my fears even more. He posted Rush Limbaugh-style rants, when he would get angrier and angrier until he was red-faced and nearly spitting. He frequently talked about violence and would show off his gun collection. This led me to finding his real last name. I googled his name and found out he'd been arrested 2 years prior for holding a woman against her will in a hotel and attempted to assault her. Thankfully, she was able to escape with only a bloody lip. We moved not long after. I wanted neighbors and off of the farm. I removed my phone number from my site and locked down all my social media. I still sleep with a baby monitor in my son's room because I'm so scared of someone coming in at night. His YouTube channel was shut down after a bit, and I haven't heard from him since. So, Stephen, I hope you wound up in jail, and let's not meet.
Take it back to 2007-2008. I was 16 when this began, 18 or 19 when it finally went to court. Picture a Norman Rockwell-esque suburban family. Parents, 3 kids, a yard and a dog, in a blink and you'll miss it USA. One random day, a neighbor man had a mild dispute with his neighbor. As a totally warranted response, neighbor man, NM from here on out, takes every hose he has and floods their yard. Solid decisions led to solid consequences, so naturally he was fined for water waste. My parent runs the water in small town USA, and because NM lived a block from us, he decided to drive over to the water district, shouting that he's an acquaintance of my parent. Second solid decision of many to come from NM. Absolutely no one takes kindly to name droppers, folks, so tuck that gem away under life facts. My parent comes in and tells him even if his kids did this, they would have the same repercussions, gracefully glossing over the fact that other than maybe driving by one another, none of us actually have ever interacted with NM. NM repeats the name of the man working the front desk, as well as my parents' name, and claims it's now personal, and storms out. My family members and I began to see NM at random places constantly: the DMV, the grocery store, our respective jobs. Apparently, when you're cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs and your parents pay for your house, you have all kinds of time to stalk. It went from random sightings while out and about to phone calls. The cliche 90s type of call, breathe, hang-ups, and I can see you variety. At this point, NM was more of an annoyance than scary. But as I've stated, when you underestimate crazy, you lose every time. NM began parking across from our house, staying from 6 PM to 4 AM, literally just sitting in his car, blasting music, staring at the house. Fool must have had the determination and bladder of a racehorse, because what the hell, who sits there for 10-ish hours? His music was trash too. Maybe he was a masochist and into self-harm, seeing how long he could suffer through crappy music and a full bladder. I doubt anyone with a semi-rational concept of social interaction could fathom why. This went on from 3 to 4 times a week to a nightly occurrence. Imagine being a 16-year-old female that doesn't even feel comfortable to change in her own room because of the prospect he might see through the blinds somehow, trying to sleep knowing he's out there. We were prisoners in our own home. He began to get bolder. NM drove his car, speeding up onto the sidewalk at my sibling and her partner, while they were on the sidewalk out front coming home from a date. They both had to physically jump out of the way to avoid being hit. He made lewd gestures at me when I brought my dog out for a walk and was waiting for my sibling to come out and join us on the walk. It was just so bad, I ended up crying and going inside. This had been going on for a year at this point. The cops always said the same thing. There's nothing we can do unless there's a threat made against you or someone is harmed. My parents confronted NM in the street after my incident, meaning they were tired of his crap and asking him what he thinks he's doing. To which NM called the cops, and they came asking us why we were harassing and threatening NM. I will never understand why the system waits until you're a victim rather than prevent someone from being victimized. Almost 2 years in, and it's Christmas time. My parent has a brain aneurysm. Fortunately, they made it through without any lingering effects, which is extremely rare. I convinced my other parent, who had been living at the hospital with their sick partner, to come home and shower and eat. About 9 PM, we get a knock at the door. A random man in ratty clothes, holding a Christmas present, says he's there to deliver it to my family name. We ask who sent him, and he says he can't say. We ask who he works for, and he shoves the gift at my parent and leaves. We're obviously uncomfortable to open it. Parents decide they need to know what it is and opens the present. Inside is a 17-page document of the grounds on why NM is suing my parent that is currently in the hospital. Even I could tell it was fake with the grammatical errors and typos. NM took the time to sit and type this up himself, thinking it would scare us. The document and fake details he put in did not. The fact this 40-something-year-old man was so fixated on our family that he sat and typed a 17-page fake document did scare us. Things progress, and NM began pacing in front of his car and pretending to have phone calls where he talked about pushing my parent down the stairs, or knowing where we kids went to school and worked, and how easy it would be to access us at any time. At the time, I worked a closing shift that let me off about 1 AM. He would be parked next to my car and follow me home. One time, I even tried to take random roads, and he still stayed right behind me, pulling up to the house with NM parked across the street. Think neighborhood street with maybe 5 feet between a car parked on one side and one on the other. And having to get out and run to the door was a nightmare. We were all exhausted, not only from the aneurysm scare, but also living looking over our shoulders. My parents' friend told her friend who's a DA, or district attorney, about the situation. She called and came over and took our case on. Testifying was a wild ride. We had to put in official statements prior to being called to the stand. We were not allowed to be in the room when a family member was testifying, nor were we allowed to talk in the halls as we waited for our turn. Imagine reliving 2+ years of traumatic experiences, being cross-examined where you're made out to be a liar, and then not able to have your family comfort or support you afterwards was not ideal. There was enough to put him away for 1.5 years, as well as grant a felony restraining order. We moved while he was still incarcerated. My sister passed while he was in prison, and he immediately tried to sue her estate when he was released. She was 21 at her death. He claimed that her testimony from running his car at her and her partner was false, and the only reason he was locked up. Not the case, as there were harassment and stalking charges, and that the money people donated to a GoFundMe for her accident, he was entitled to. There's so many more details, but this was already long enough. So NM, let's never, ever meet again. You made us prisoners in our own home for years. Clearly you are still the same, and have not learned a thing from your time locked up. For the longest time, there was this man that would sit in his garage and watch me. He was an older man, and he was very scrawny. He had patchy grey hair and a super gross beard. I never learned his name, so we'll call him Nick. He looked like a Nick to me. I moved into my classic suburban home before I was even born. I've been living there my whole life, and the first memory I have of Nick was when I was 10 and he gave me a small 2-finger wave as I walked back home after school. I had to see him every day since my bus stop was a few houses down, and I walked like a block to get home. My mum said he dropped by after I was born, knocked on the door in the middle of the day and rang the doorbell until someone answered. My mum finally answered, my 1-year-old brother attached to her leg and newborn me in her arms. She said his face lit up when he saw me. He smiled brightly and asked to hold me. She obviously declined, because who the hell comes to your house to hold your child when you don't know them in the slightest? She said he scowled at her, before calmly walking back to sit in his garage to smoke a cigar. After my first encounter with Nick, I never stopped seeing him. Every day after school, every morning before school, every time I took my dogs out for a walk, every time I peeked out my window at 3 a.m. I swear this guy never slept. I told my brother how it freaked me out, and he said he was probably on house arrest, and that was the only way he could get out. We learned that wasn't true when he knocked on our door. Small bit of background for this bit. My mum is very weak. She has an autoimmune disease, and her legs and feet will go numb randomly. She's doing a lot better now, but this event happened when she was pretty bad. She insisted she take the dogs out alone, and I didn't want to argue, so I sat in the living room. After about a minute, I hear a knock. I yell out that the door's unlocked, thinking it's my mum. But there's a louder knock. I get up and go to the door. I open it, and there he is, smiling at me. "Hey, hun, your mum fell off the porch. You might want to help her," Nick states, giving me goosebumps. His voice was unreal, so raspy, and sounded like he was in the process of choking. He leaves very quickly, and I hurry to help my mum off the grass, calling my younger brother to get the 2 dogs inside. I gave her the "I told you so" speech, and she grumbled about it for 2 weeks. My younger dog, a pit bull made of 98% muscle, got excited when she saw a bird. She pulled to get the bird and yanked my mum off the porch. She was standing behind a pot and tripped over it on her way down, making the fall hurt a lot more. She had a black eye and her legs were scratched up to hell and back. The pot of flowers that she tripped over was smashed, but she was okay otherwise. Flash forward to my 13th birthday, and my mum's in hospital, so my dad goes all out, letting me invite a ton of friends over for a sleepover, making us dinner and breakfast, and just letting me have an amazing time. There's a park across from my suburb that I walk over to sometimes. I decided that I wanted to take my friends there to chill before their parents picked them up. The night before, we were looking out the window and giggling about the man. I know it's crappy, but he was creepy and we were 13, so they knew he was weird. I told them to ignore him if he talked to them, but I didn't take my own advice. "Hey, Rosie," he said it so quietly I barely heard him. My name is Rose, and Rosie is my nickname my grandfather often used. I never told this guy my name, neither did any of my family members. Hi," I replied, and my friends all scowled at me, knowing I messed up. "How's your mum?" "She's fine." I go to leave before I pause. "How do you know my name?" "You told me, remember?" "No, I don't, because it didn't happen, but I wanted to get away, so I agreed." "Oh, right," I chuckle. Me and my friends scurry off to the park. The next day, there's a box of chocolates sitting on the porch, a note with "Rosie" in chicken scratch writing on top of it. I pick it up and look over at the guy. He waves, and I can see that his left hand has disappeared into his pants. Gross. I leave the box out there and tell my dad. The next morning, me and my dad take our dogs out. No man. I figured he gave up after he saw me reject his chocolates. A few weeks later, a large family moves into the house, and I hadn't seen a trace of the man until yesterday. I'm 15 now, and the woman who lives in the guy's house comes over yesterday. "Does a Rosie live here?" she asks. I had answered the door, and my heart drops at the nickname from this stranger. "Yeah, why?" She hands me an envelope with my full name written on it. The guy who lived in the house before us said to give Rosie this on her birthday. Trying to pretend I wasn't Rosie, I said, "It's not Rosie's birthday." She said, "Oh, well, I just took a guess. He didn't give us a date. Have a good day." My dad opened the envelope, wearing a mask, and I quote, "What if he filled it with cocaine?" The note inside just said, "Love you," in his writing, red ink, my favorite color. So, old guy that lived on the corner, let's not meet again. I don't love you, never have, never will. Update. The man was arrested for child pornography. Nothing to do with me, thank the deities. Our local news went crazy about it. Last week, our suburb was flooded with news vans and stuff. I'm just glad he's going to be in prison and not lurking around, stalking other girls. I'm from a small town, the kind where you're in the same class as the same kids from preschool through graduation. I was never popular and had my fair share of bullies, but never as bad as one kid in my class, Max. He was on the shorter side and had these little round glasses with his hair slicked to the side like he was right out of a movie cast as a stereotypical nerd. He kept to himself and didn't really interact with others if he could avoid it. Fast forward to 8th grade, when we were paired as lab partners and had to sit at the same table together every day for the entire year. I considered myself a nice person and always went out of my way to make sure I wasn't rude to people, especially people who hadn't done anything to deserve it. So, of course I was friendly and happy to be his partner as long as he did his fair share of the work. The year came and went. He was shy but polite. We got along just fine being partners. 9th grade started, and I had a lot of troubles at home with my birth father, so I chose to move in with my mother a few towns over. I was only about 30 minutes away, but I had to start a completely new school a month into freshman year, and it was scary. I may not have been popular at my last school, but I did have several friends whom I loved and missed dearly. My mum would often drive me to the other town to see my friends and hang out, and I also started making new friends at my new school. It was a good setup, and I continued this way until I was 16 and could drive myself. I never heard anything from Max, and honestly, I had kind of forgotten about him. That was until my junior year of high school. I started casually seeing this other guy, Jack, from my hometown, and he asked me to go with him to prom. I was excited and happy to say yes, as I would get to spend the night with him and my friends from childhood. A couple of months before prom, my mother told me that there was a new lady at her job, and she was asking about me because her grandson was seeing me, and she wanted a picture so she could put a face to my name. My mother knew Jack, and knew this wasn't his grandmother, so she asked his name, and wouldn't you know it, it was Max. My mother showed her a picture of me that she had on her desk, and the lady went on her way. A few weeks later, she asked for the color of my prom dress so that she knew what to get Max, so that we matched. My mother was confused but told her it was pink. About 2 weeks before prom, some of my friends from my hometown told me that Max had been telling some people that we were going to the dance together and that he was so excited. I thought this was creepy, but I didn't put too much thought into it. The night of prom, I picked Jack up, and we headed over to the school, only to find Max and his grandmother waiting outside the entrance so that she could take pictures of us before we go in. I was not one to disappoint people, so I politely took a couple of pictures with him, as my actual date stood off to the side and waited. If Max's grandmother was confused that I had another date, she didn't show it. When I was 17, I was pretty shy and awkward, and just wanted to get in the building. He and his grandmother were literally waiting like in front of the doors. I'm a much more outspoken person now, and I would never let that fly today. The rest of the night went smoothly, and Jack and I had a great time. We didn't see Max anymore and assumed he had left. Other than his grandmother telling my mum that he lost my number and trying to get it for him, which she thankfully didn't do, I didn't hear from him until we graduated. I went to a state college, and I heard that he had gotten into a well-respected private university. Everything was fine for the first few weeks of college, and then I ran into him. He caught me on the way to class one day. I was polite and asked him if he was a student here too, which he was. I chatted to him for a minute before hurrying off to class. It was a relatively harmless interaction, but still creeped me out a bit since I knew he got into that other school and wondered why he chose to go to a state college. For the next few months, I ran into him almost daily. He always wanted to talk and never seemed to be with anyone else. I found out from some girls in my dorm that he had been hanging around, asking about me and trying to figure out my class schedule and where I would be and when. He also told them that he was my boyfriend, and he passed up a scholarship to another college to come here and be with me instead. They figured out he was lying when they never saw us together for long periods, or him up in the rooms with me, and stopped answering his questions. I left at the end of the semester to move home and take classes at a nearby school. I didn't tell him, obviously. The following year, I got married to my boyfriend from my senior year of high school. Dumb, I know. Anyway, we were in his small town, which is in the same county as my hometown, for a fair time shortly after the wedding. While walking around and enjoying ourselves, I see Max staring at us at the end of the block. It was the first time I have been genuinely fearful of him, as the look on his face was nothing short of hatred. I tried to ignore him and went about my night, seeing him a few more times, always with that look on his face. The next few years passed, with me hearing nothing from him at all. I don't even know if he still lived around the area or not. I found out a little while after that he did when I started working at a clothing store in town, and he would stop in and sit in that dad chair next to the door for all the guys to hang out in while their people shopped. I mentioned it to my manager because of our history, and the fact that he would stare at me constantly while sitting there, but always came in with a girl. I later found out it was his sister, so they didn't think too much of it. He never spoke to me, just stared. When I was in my mid-20s, I moved to a city in my home state, but still several hours away from my small town. I'm 30 now, and doing well in life. Other than a random Facebook friend request, which I reject, I haven't heard from him. I hope it stays that way. This happened like 2 years ago, and I still get nightmares about it. I was in 8th grade at that time, and I go to a big public school near my house. It was my first day and all, so the teacher assigned me to sit next to a boy who looked nice and outgoing. Let's call him Dan. So I took a seat there, and he was chatty, asking me about my name, etc. He was really friendly and normal. After a few days of sitting next to him, I felt these bad vibes around him, but I never really gave it that much thought. Then, after 2 months of sitting next to him, he was trying all sorts of things to get closer to me, and I was uncomfortable with his actions, but I didn't confront him. I know, I was naive and not good with confrontations. But John, my guy friend, was assigned to sit next to us. Now I'm sitting in the middle of Dan and John. So John and Dan grew close, and I had no problems with that. Then John was going to eat lunch with us when he brought Dan with him. I was surprised that Dan was now tagging along with us, which he never did before. But I never paid attention to it, so Dan took a seat next to me, not next to John, but to me. I was a little confused, but as a naive 14-year-old girl, I brushed it off. But that's when things get a little creepy. He started moving closer to me, like he was trying to let our bodies touch. But as a Catholic girl, I was told to stay my distance with boys, so I moved a little away from him. But he didn't stop, he kept doing that. That's when my friend told me she needed assistance in the bathroom, and that I should go with her. I frantically accepted. Turns out my friend noticed how creepy he was, but I still didn't do anything about it. I thought maybe he was just having a crush on me, but I kept my distance from him, and that's when he started to really get creepy. One day, I had gotten very sick and couldn't go to school, so I stayed home and just watched some TV and checked my Facebook, and that's when I saw it. Dan had sent me a friend request, which I never accepted, and some message requests. I was curious, so I opened it, and there it was, hundreds of messages from him. He was asking me why I wasn't at school, and what happened to me. He was also getting mad and cursing at me. He also said that I was a bitch for ignoring his messages. All those 100 messages were sent the same day. I felt sick to my stomach. I've never experienced this, but I didn't tell my parents because I was scared they wouldn't allow me to go out with my friends anymore. I was stupid. And that night, I was pretty shaken up from what he did when I received another new message from him. And that message still haunts me to this day. "Hey, I hear you were sick. Sorry for getting mad at you. I just thought you were avoiding me. So feel better and drink your medicine. I know you haven't eaten dinner yet, so please eat dinner so you can feel better. Then I can see you again at school." That sent chills all over my body, because I hadn't told anyone I was sick, and my parents didn't tell anyone either, not even my own teacher. And the fact he knew I hadn't eaten dinner yet was so weird because it was 11 p.m. and people usually eat at 8. I suddenly felt like I was being watched, so I closed my curtains. I still didn't tell my parents because I was making myself believe that maybe it was just a coincidence. I got better and was on my way to school. I didn't want to sit next to him anymore, but that wasn't an option because my teacher was pretty strict when it came to seating arrangements. I was walking to school when I see him walking behind me. A sick feeling came to my stomach again. I just speed up my pace, and he did the same. I was so scared, but finally I reached the school entrance and ran. And I saw my friend and told her everything. She advised me to stay away from him, and I did. But that didn't stop him. That's when Valentine's Day arrived. Our school made a big deal about Valentine's Day, so they cancelled all the classes that day, but still asked us to go to school and made us wear red clothes. I just wore black jeans and a red plain shirt with a black cardigan, nothing really fancy. But then I get a message from him asking if he could take a picture of me and print it so he can, quote, watch me while he falls asleep. He sent it with a winking face. I didn't know what that meant, so I just ignored him again. But I saw him staring at me while touching himself. I was so weirded out that I reported him to our teacher, but they didn't do anything, so my friends just made sure that he stayed away from me. When a guy gave me chocolates and flowers because they liked me, Dan threw angry glares at me, but I ignored him again. So when I was on my way to our classroom to get my bag because I left it there, I saw Dan sitting there. His face was blank. We were both alone in the classroom because our classmates were busy at the gymnasium. I was so scared, but I put on a brave face and walked to my bag. He saw me and screamed, "You're a slut, just like your mother. Why won't you like me back? God wants us to be together." I was so scared that I froze on the spot. He was looking at me and I was feeling like I was going to die. But he stormed off and I was relieved. I left after that and cried in front of my friends. And that was the last straw, because I told my parents and they reported him. But the school just said they were going to talk to him, which they never did, because he didn't show up at class the next day. We heard he quit school and was working at a small convenience store near the school. But that's not the end of it, because he made a fake account with his name, but his picture was me. He sent me another message, a screenshot of his phone, and the wallpaper was me. But the picture that he sent me was not familiar with me. I never took that picture. It was shot from my window while I was sitting in my bed studying. I had my earphones on. I was wearing a large t-shirt with no bra and just shorts. He captioned it with a, "I hope to lay next to your bed." I was so freaked out that I cried. I told my mum about it, but she told me to just block it because we were going to move out of that town in a few weeks, and so I did. But he just didn't take the message. A year after the incident, I'm now in the 9th grade, but we didn't move because there was a problem in the new house. That's when he created another fake account with my friend John's name and picture on it, and I accepted it. Because John was talking about creating a new Facebook profile a week ago, so I assumed it was him. Now, Dan, who was pretending to be John, messaged me and said, "I just want to explain. I dropped out of school because of you. I told my parents that we broke up and that I can't stand seeing you. I'm also sorry for shouting at you that day, but I want us to be together, to have lovely children. If you can't like me back, it's fine to me. Just don't block me again, because I think I'll kill myself if you do that, okay? Love you." I was confused at first, because I thought John was messaging me, but it sunk in that this was Dan. I immediately got so sick to my stomach that I vomited in my toilet. I was so scared of what my next move would be, because if I block him, could he still actually kill himself based on his mental state? Instead of blocking him, I asked my parents to reach out to his parents, and they did. His parents were so embarrassed, and they apologized to us, through text of course. I heard he was now at a mental facility getting the help he needs, and me, well, we moved out, and I cut all my connections with Dan. I started a new life, and now I'm very cautious with who I become friends with. So to the guy who stalked me, let's not meet again. First things first, gotta rip the band-aid off and admit that from late 2001 to mid-2003, when I was a teenager, I wrote fanfiction and posted it online. My stories weren't that great, but I made friends because I posted them, so I don't regret doing it. Even after I stopped posting stories, I was still active online, and instead posted fan art and dumb stuff about roleplays I did with my buddies over on DeviantArt. Maybe I sound like a lame fangirl, but whatever, I was having fun. Fast forward to 2008, when I got a PM on DeviantArt that was, well, I really wasn't expecting online life to take such a strange turn on that particular random day. The writer, Ari, began her missive by informing me, a complete stranger, that she was seriously mentally ill. She listed a wide variety of disorders, including schizophrenia, which had tormented her all her life. She then said she was scared to write to me like this, but that she had to do it so she could move on. Move on from what, you ask? From her hatred of me, of course. Ari wrote that she had hated me for a long time, based on the fanfiction I wrote, because my stories terrified her. Okay, now let's be clear. I wrote stories about characters from cartoons, and one comic book. One of the characters from that comic book was a violent and terrible person, and I wrote about him doing violent things. But that's not what was scaring her, no. Ari was scared because she was in love with the said violent character, John, and believed they were destined for each other, and that he talked to her in her head. And then she read my fanfiction, and suddenly, John stopped talking to her, and she knew it was because he was talking to me instead. She was absolutely certain that I had stolen her true love from her. She said that after that, she developed a belief that I was the arbiter of her reality. This is a direct quote. I will never forget that phrase, and that I was capable of reaching into her mind and not only reading, but taking away her precious thoughts. This caused her so much anguish and suffering. However, she went on. Deep down, she also knew that this was a delusion caused by her mental illness. Ari closed her PM by begging me to respond to her, to confirm that I was just a normal girl, so she could get past this trauma I caused her and be happy again. Now, I have to again rip off a band-aid of inviting judgment here by admitting that sometimes I'm a complete dumbass. I'm also a soft-hearted person, and the idea that someone could have been harmed by the silly stories I'd posted years earlier made me kind of sad. So I did a soft-hearted, but ultimately dumbass thing and responded. Yeah, Yeah, I was a normal teenage girl when I posted that stuff, and now I'm a normal early 20s woman with no mind-stealing superpowers. Also, I don't know you and had no idea you existed until you sent me this. So how can I have singled you out to hurt you with my fanfics? Please don't worry about me. And I thought, what a kind person I am, and surely that will be the end of it. Wrong. Ari replied to me using a different, upbeat and cheerful tone, saying she was so glad I wrote back to her because now she knew she didn't have to fear me and we could just be friends. She loved my fanfics, honestly. And by the way, what was my real name so she could find me on Facebook? Excuse me? No? A dumbass I may be, but I ain't that stupid. I told her I didn't have a Facebook, which was a lie, and was busy with school, which was the truth. So I wouldn't be on DeviantArt a whole lot, a half-truth. But I wished her good luck with her mental health recovery, and hoped she would have a good life. A truth, I mean, so far she seemed troubled and weird, but I wouldn't have wished harm on her. I didn't get a response from that. But a few months later, I got a DeviantArt PM from another account that I didn't know that simply asked, "Hey, how do you get your characters to talk for you?" Now, I hadn't posted any fanfiction for years, but I was still participating in fandom and talked online about writing. And I honestly thought that this question was about writing, specifically dialogue. I mulled over how to respond and ended up not answering right away. I went back to my PMs a few days later and saw I had another message, this one saying, with a lot of exclamation points and crypt-typing style misspellings, that I had to answer and teach this stranger how to talk to my characters, and that I didn't know how long this user had suffered because of me. Oh my goodness, I wonder who it was using another account. And guess what? I was still a goddamn dumbass. So I answered the first message, but sort of detachedly, ignoring the desperation of the second message and just kind of giving tips for how to learn a character's, quote, voice and how to write dialogue for them. Once again, I got a very chipper reply, including a confession that, yeah, it was Ari, and she just loved talking to me and thought I was so nice and such a good friend to be patient with her and answer her burning questions about how to talk to my, yes, specifically my characters. Because you see, she had realized that she wasn't just in love with John, but my John from my stupid fanfiction. And now, she could talk to him anytime because we were friends. I got the idea that she was not asking to roleplay, and instead thought she would be able to communicate directly with this once-removed fictional character now. But I feigned ignorance and said something like, our RP group is kind of private and not accepting new members, but I hope I answered your question, and please have a good day. Because I didn't really want to be friends with someone who, A, seemed to believe I was somehow responsible for her illness or health, despite not knowing her from Adam and having only spoken to her twice, and B, had already told me once that she hated me and thought I could control her reality. On the kinder side of things, I honestly didn't think continuing to converse would be good for either of our comforts. On the meaner side, I just really didn't want to interact with this person anymore, and felt I had already done more than enough to help this stranger. Okay, so she stopped responding to me, and I thought this strange interlude in my life was over. Wrong. Now fast forward 7 entire years to early July 2015, at which time I had moved my main online presence to Tumblr. I left a note on my DeviantArt account in 2011 when I moved, giving my new Tumblr screen name so my fandom buddies could find me easily. At this point, I had not posted any fanfiction for over a decade. I also wasn't talking much at all online about John, except to reblock the occasional post someone else made about the comic he was from, as you do on Tumblr. Suddenly, I receive an anonymous ask, and that ask said in no uncertain terms that I was the cause of the asker's suffering, because I had callously disregarded others' feelings. It closed with some kind of weird threat. I can't remember exactly what now, because I instinctively deleted the ask due to being unnerved. I guessed that it could be Ari, based on the typing style and the fact that there couldn't be two people in the world who think I make them, quote, suffer, right? But it had been 7 years, so I wasn't entirely sure. And then I did yet another dumbass thing. I made a post that said something along the lines of, "To the anon that sent me a vaguely threatening ask, sorry if anything I've posted has upset you. Please let me know if I can tag my posts a certain way so you can block whatever content you find distressing." A couple of days later, I got another anon ask calling me a prattling, ostentatious idiot. Direct quote, and saying, "It doesn't work that way," and "Strong emotions cannot just be blocked." The message went on, "You stole him away from me, and I've been living in turmoil since, and you don't care." Ah yes, definitely Ari. There was no question about it. After all, I haven't stolen anyone else's fictional boyfriend that I know of. I turned off anonymous asks. I also went back to my old, untouched DeviantArt account, where I found a comment on my front page from yet a third account there that said, "If you still talk to him, tell him that I love him and that I always will. He was the first man I ever loved, and it was your version of him I loved above all. I've been jealous, angry at you, angry at myself, depressed and psychotic. I tore myself to shreds over him, and my heart aches and cries. The first cut is the deepest. I love you, John." The date on this message was June 28th, 2015, just a few days before the first anon ask on Tumblr. I did a little internet sleuthing, just a simple Google of Ari's known usernames, and found her Fur Affinity account, where she had posted screeds in her journal about hating anyone else who wrote or drew anything about John. Okay. I also discovered through this Google search that I was not completely special by triggering Ari's ear, and that she had also gone after another person on Tumblr in much the same way, demanding answers to emotionally charged asks, assuming friendships where there wasn't any, and then stalking the person using multiple accounts and email addresses, and accusing them of harming her. This other person had amassed a collection of screenshots of Ari's behavior, and it was really super not good. Anyway, I figured since I had blocked her non-asks, maybe she'd just go away. Wrong. Ari's next wave of stuff began in 2016, when someone started reblogging my personal text posts with cryptic comments like, "You have a beautiful soul." The username was nothing like Ari, or any of the other account names she'd used before, so I just thought someone was being socially awkward. But after a few months of this, I received a message from this account through Tumblr's chat function that let the cat out of the bag. This person said something like, "I'm a British female creature with," insert same litany of mental illnesses from Ari's first PM in 2008. "And I'm so scared of dying alone and friendless. I used to read your fanfiction and it always made me feel better. I think you're an amazing woman and would like to get to know you better. Please, I'm begging you, don't leave me alone in the dark." Well, this sure sounded a lot like Ari to me. This was confirmed when I went to the person's Tumblr and saw they had recently posted something passive-aggressive about another Tumblr user Ari was known to stalk. And if that wasn't enough, they also had a lot of weird innuendo-laden posts about John and a couple of other characters, including Sherlock, and a man I didn't recognize, and who they claimed to have legally married. It was at that point I finally decided to stop being a soft-hearted dumbass. I blocked the account that sent me the chat message right away without responding. Over the next several months, Ari attempted to contact others on Tumblr who it was obvious I talked to a lot. My girlfriend, our best friend, etc. She sent them chat messages like the one paraphrased above. Hilarious in the case of my girlfriend, who never wrote any fanfiction. Begging for their friendship and, just casually asking what I was doing. Whether they could get me to talk to her, that sort of thing. I know my girlfriend and BFF blocked her too after they asked me who the hell this person was, and I told them the whole story. I also discovered that on Tumblr, you can choose an option to allow chat messages only from people you follow. With that account blocked, and no one I don't follow able to send me chat messages, I naively thought again that surely this weird nonsense would end. Wrong. See, the thing about Tumblr, if you're not familiar with the website, is that if you block someone, they just can't interact with your posts or follow you. A block causes someone to auto-unfollow you, and they won't see your posts on their feed. They also won't be able to send you asks. However, they can still go to your actual blog, username.tumblr.com, and see everything you post. If they try to interact with any of your posts on your blog, like reply, reblog, or like, they won't be able to, which will, of course, tip them off that you blocked them. Beginning of 2018, Ari engaged in a whirlwind of activity. She made a new account, sent me an ask or 15, saying various things from, "Please talk to me, I'm harmless. You don't know how hard it is to be me," to, "I'm so scared of the darkness," and "Humans are social animals and I'm dying without you," to, "I guess you like psychos like John, but can't handle a real psycho like me," and "I want to kidnap you far away in a happy ending, my darling." So I blocked that account immediately. So she made a new account and reblogged some post I made a while back about John's comic book with a comment like, "My first love, the first cut is the deepest," before sending me multiple asks all saying, "You stole him from me." So I blocked that account immediately. So she made another one. Made some meme generator sparkly picture of rats and spiders with text like, "I just want to sit next to you and be your friend. I'm not scary," and posted them with @my username. So this mention would show up on my Dash's activity feed. So I blocked that account. So she made a new account, posted a quote from my favorite author, well-known info, I post about him frequently, and sent me a couple of asks saying that this author would disagree with how I was treating her by continuing to block and shun her friendship when she was, quote, harmless and just thought I was an amazing person. So I blocked that account. Mate, did you forget you called me a prattling, ostentatious idiot and threatened me? Because I sure haven't. This went on for 10 accounts, one of which had the blog title in huge letters at the top, "Hello," and my nickname reserved for only close friends, one of which she inundated with photos of herself glaring at the camera, my first looks at her face, and I don't like to judge people on appearance, but this girl has a really creepy glare, and also looks like she's not showered in weeks. She only ever used one of these accounts to actually post, reblog, and like things from other people, like a seemingly normal user, albeit one who made some questionable comments sometimes. All the rest only existed to bother me. I started trying to report her to Tumblr after the third or fourth time for making multiple accounts solely to evade my blocks, but if you know anything about Tumblr, you can guess they didn't respond with more than an automated, "Okay, we'll look into this. In the meantime, have you tried blocking this user?" Anyway, throughout 2018, I just had to deal with the fact that any time I saw the little red flag above my ask box icon, it would probably be something creepy and either threatening or passive-aggressive from Ari that would put me on edge for a couple of hours and remind me that no matter what I do on Tumblr, She can read everything I post. I haven't gotten anything from her so far in 2019, but I figure as long as she's out there, there's always a chance she'll come back. Maybe not right away, maybe not until another 10 years from now, but let me just say, Ari, you weirdo, I'm genuinely sorry about your mental illnesses and hope you get help for them. But while they may explain some of your behavior, they don't excuse it. I am not and never will be your friend because you are not, quote, harmless. You made me heavily curtail my social interaction on Tumblr by cutting off a couple of methods of communication that could have been used to make new friends. You made me worried about ever talking there about a comic I enjoy. You made it so any time I see I have an ask, my heart rate goes up because it might be more of your disturbing BS. You've harassed my loved ones and also other strangers who probably didn't do anything to deserve it. I don't control your reality, but if I did, you can bet I'd use that power to ensure we'd never meet.